Hello. Thank you for having me this afternoon. I am going to cover the budget for fiscal year 18-19, talk a little bit about the legislative session that we are now in the middle of, and then take your questions. So, the fiscal year 18-19 budget. We look at it kind of in three different buckets, but the overall budget, we're at $3.1 billion now. It's a very large budget. The reason I say three different buckets, because there are different ability to use these funds. So the academic core is really kind of our main funds that are used for the academic and research mission. It's really our funds from the state and tuition. And we have the ability to decide how to use those funds. When we talk about academic enhancement and self-supporting, those are more restrictive. And I'll talk about each of these as I go along. This is a pie chart of our total university sources. So you can see here, our state general revenue now is only 11% of our budget. So that's the state tax portion of our budget is 11%. It's been pretty steady around the 11-12% for a number of years now. Back in the 80s, it was in the 40% range, so changed quite a bit. Tuition, now you can see, is double what we're getting from the state, 22%. I'll talk a little bit more about AUF, but AUF is the funding that we get. It's also state appropriated funding, but it's from our West Texas lands and the oil, and I'll show you a picture of that in just a second. But then we have the self-supporting and academic enhancement. We have some indirect cost money in there, but that's just all the sources for the whole university. The academic core piece. So this is the piece I was saying is the part that we have the ability to decide how to use these funds. So the academic core is $1.6 billion. And of that, we have state general revenue. So these are the same sources that were on the other chart, but just in a little bit different picture. The indirect cost piece, that is funds, those of you that might be in research areas. So indirect cost is the funding that we receive mostly from federal government. So most of our research grants are federal. And so they provide funds to us to pay for the costs of doing that research on our campus. So it's not direct support of doing that research, but it's all the other costs, using the buildings, using our administrative support. So the federal government, as part of the grant, gives us indirect costs. So that's part of our academic core budget as well. So just a little bit different picture of that. And then the other funds are other things. We have some balances. We have intellectual property income. We have administrative fee, which I'll talk about when I talk about the auxiliaries, but just a little bit different picture of it. And I mentioned the AUF. So the Permanent University Fund, that's our West Texas lands. This is just kind of a flow of how that works. So we have the lands out in West Texas. They generate. We have cash investments on that. Return on investment that becomes our available university fund. So we'll hear PUF, that's the big endowment. That's the endowment that we don't touch. It sits at UT System, and it's UTIMCO, the investment company, actually manages those funds. So that's our state endowment that funds us. But the available university fund is the investment off of that comes to UT Austin. It also goes to Texas A&M System. So we get 2/3 at UT System. A&M gets 1/3. And then it goes from our side, from the UT System side, it pays the UT System costs of administration, as well as there's some permanent university fund bonds that the other UT System campuses can participate in. And that's really for major renovations and new facilities at those campuses. So they receive some of those funds, and then UT Austin gets a portion. And that is sometimes called our excellence funds, but it's really just for the operations of UT Austin. And for 18-19, the recurring portion, the part that is ongoing, is $300 million. So how do we use those that $1.6 billion of funds? You can see here, 57% of it is for staff and benefits. So we are a very labor-intensive organization, and so 57% of our academic core is for staff, faculty, and benefits. And then you can see all the other things. We have scholarships, we have to pay our utilities, we have debt service on loans that we've had for various facilities and renovations. We have academic research development that goes to the colleges for new programs and things like that. We have capital funds, so but the majority of it, salaries and benefits. Okay, so that's the academic core is the part that we have the University Budget Council, the president, the provost, the CFO really have the ability to decide how those funds are allocated. And then academic enhancement, these are very limited funds as far as how we can use them because they come from contracts and grants, which we get a grant for a specific research program. We can only use those funds for that grant. We can't say, oh, well, we're going to pay some salaries over here and we're going to buy some equipment for some other project. It has to be used for that research endeavor for which we received it. Same with gifts. We do receive some gifts that are unrestricted, meaning, oh, you know, here's some money, do whatever you want with it. Very, very tiny part of our gift funds. Really, most of it is restricted by the donor. And the donor says, I want to fund this chair in engineering, and we have to use it for that purpose, unless we get a change from the donor. But so the president can't choose how to use these funds. The provost can't choose how to use these funds. They have to be used by the restriction for which we were given. There are some other things. One example that's up here is the Central Health District. So that's funds that the county actually gave for our Dell Medical School. And again, it's restricted to be used for the Dell Medical School. So there's other programs that are more restricted, but not quite gifts or grants. Then we have self-supporting. So this is the third item of the 3 buckets. Self-supporting, these are units that basically run like mini businesses within the university. Their funds are still part of our overall university budget, but they pay for a lot of their expenses directly through the fees or the charges that they have for their unit. So Auxiliary Enterprises is the name of the units at a university that are completely self-supporting. So, you know, you see athletics here, housing and food, AT&T Center. They pay their own salaries, they pay their own fringe benefits, they pay facility upgrades, they pay utilities. So those expenses are their responsibility. In addition to that, I don't know if you remember, there was a little note previously about administrative fees, administrative charges. So all of these units also pay 5% of their expenses back to the Central University to help pay for it. It's kind of like indirect costs of a research grant. They're paying basically the indirect cost of performing that function at a university, and you know, we have administrative costs and other costs that they're paying for. So that 5% comes back centrally to the academic core. And then there's this other $133 million. They're not completely auxiliaries, but they pay most of their own expenses. So they're things like the University Conference Center, Texas Performing Arts. So they're a little bit of a hybrid, but mostly like an auxiliary. So that covers just a general budget overview. And then I wanted to just show you this slide, just to give you an idea of how decisions are made, and this may help with some of the questions later as well. When you're looking at, and we're just talking about the academic core here, this is kind of a sample of a forecast out 5 years. So budget 18-19, we know that, it's balanced. Then we look at the forecast for 1920 and the out years, and you see a lot of the numbers that look the same every year, right? We don't know at this point. We're in a legislative session, so for the next 2 years, right now, we don't know what our general revenue is going to be from the state. Tuition, you can see a little increase between 1819 and 1920, and that's already been approved by the Board of Regents. But then in the out years, are we going to be able to have a tuition increase? We'll go through a tuition policy setting process and see. So that we have to show is flat in the out years. You look at AUF estimate, it's 371 with some non-recurring money. So the Board of Regents every year sets our available university fund amount based on a calculation that they go through, but also they can decide to give us additional funds. But that's an annual decision, and usually we can't count on that recurring, so we can't really pay salaries out of that because we don't know if the next year we're going to get that same amount. So that AUF system estimate we're showing is flat in the out years because we got some one-time money, but we don't know if we're going to get it again in the out years. And so this is really just showing you that right now, almost every year, and especially every biennium when we're in a legislative year, we're trying to determine as best we can what funding we're going to get, but there's a lot of unknowns. And then you can see projected uses. So if we were to give a 2% salary increase every year, you can see it adds up quickly because that's recurring money, right? There's 20 to 25 million a year to pay for a 2% salary increase, fringe benefits, and then other things that increase, like insurance may go up every year, or there's other costs that go up. So 20 to 25 million a year, if we don't have any of these other revenue sources going up, then we can't balance the budget. So, okay, because we're in a legislative process, I just wanted to talk quickly about that. We have already had our first hearing with the Legislative Budget Board, and that's to go over our legislative appropriation request. It's really just with staff from the governor's office and the Legislative Budget Board, and the president talks about his priorities at that meeting. That took place in September, but then there'll be other hearings that come up where we go to the House and the Senate, and the president again talks about our priorities and needs. So those are all coming in the next few months. As this is all going on, we're trying to determine what that general revenue line is going to be on our forecast, and so we're getting numbers. We have introduced bills from the House and the Senate. We're looking at those closely and trying to decide how to estimate and provide information to administration on what we think the numbers are going to be. This is just an example of more of the unknowns that are coming up at the legislative session. So 16-17 is the first column here, but then you can see in 17-18, that was the first year of the last biennium, there's this line here that says hold harmless. So what the legislature did is they reduced our budget a lot in the what used to be called special items, but non-formula items. So if any of you work for Marine Science Institute, Institute for Geophysics, Bureau of Economic Geology, McDonald Observatory, those are all special units on our campus that receive special funding. And there were large cuts to the non-formula items as well as some other cuts. So basically, they cut our budget $55 million over the biennium, and then that's about $27.5 million each year. And then they put it back in what's called hold harmless. So they gave it back to us, but then it's kind of unknown what is going to happen in this session with that funding. It's, we're hopeful that it's going to be part of our recurring budget and part of our appropriation. But at this point, it's early in the session, and we're waiting to see what will happen. So it just kind of shows that's another unknown here. Just to give you some history of what's happened, many of you in this room were probably here when 2010, 2011, the state had major cuts, and the 2012, 2013, general revenue was cut by $92 million over that 2-year period, $46 million a year. So our budget went down 16.5%. We've come back a little bit over the next 2 bienniums, but then you can see that reduction, even with the hold harmless in 18-19, we still had another reduction. So if you add all that up, it's really about an $11 million hole we're still in, short from 2010, 2011. So that's, almost 10 years now. And that doesn't include, we get some appropriations for tuition revenue bonds. And for the first time in 18-19, we received some appropriation for Dell Medical School. And I didn't put that in here because just for consistency purposes, so you can see the comparison. But that, they did get close to $12 million over the biennium for Dell Medical School. So that was good. So the things that we're going to be looking at in this legislative session are, what's going to happen with that hold harmless. We're really, it's important to look at and keep up with the non-formula items, our McDonald Observatory Marine Science Institute, and the president has talked a lot about those and the importance of those. And we're starting to get bills introduced right now, so there's not really a whole lot to talk about, but I'm happy to come back if any of you are interested later. That's what I was going to talk about, and I'm ready for questions either from previous or...
Well, I'll kick it off.
Okay.
You had mentioned something about Marine Science Institute. Can you talk to us about how the hurricane impacted us?
Yes. Hurricane Harvey did impact Marine Science Institute quite a bit. Many of their facilities were damaged. Their laboratories were damaged. The faculty and graduate students couldn't do their work. Starting to come back. It's been over a year. But it was, $30 to $40 million of damage there. So we're working with insurance and FEMA to restore them. And they had a grand reopening a few months ago before the holidays and opened one of their buildings. So it's it's still they're getting back, but it's still a lot of work to do.
All right, other questions?
Hello, how are you? Just a quick question. It's probably not a possibility, but we'll see. So it seems like we received quite a few gifts, and I'm just wondering if the university has the ability to create some sort of policy that says, thank you for these gifts. Upon receiving these gifts, we have the ability to distribute these funds as we see fit. That could then be put into the system as, however, again, we see fit and help other auxiliaries or whoever else. So.
Sure, we could ask that of donors, but it's up to the donor whether or not they want to do that. That's really probably a development office question, but, I think, it might be possible to get some portion of a donor donation to cover unlimited needs. But for the most part, donors want to name a facility or they want to name a chair and those types of things. It's very important to them. It's a passion for them that they want to give money for a very specific purpose.
You said the percentage of the unrestricted gifts is pretty small, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, percentage-wise, yes. I don't have that number, but yes, it's a small percentage.
Hello, I was just wondering how much of that 11% of the public funding goes to that 57% for the salaries and benefits. And as the budget from the public continues to decrease, how much influence do they have as that budget decreases over, the level of control with the different kinds of things we have to report to the public? And is there a fine line where it switches over?
Well, not in Texas. We have to, we are still adhering to all state policies, but that's a really interesting question because state of Colorado did something like that when the state appropriations dropped below a certain percentage, and I don't know what the percentage was, but then they were free from all state regulations. I'm not really sure how that has worked out for them in the long run, but it was something that they did. As far as the percentage of salaries that come from state general revenue, it just kind of depends on each unit, so it could vary by unit. So the auxiliaries don't get any state funding, so no salaries are paid from state funding. But most units, colleges and schools have a mix, so they have some endowments that will pay for their own salaries. They have some, maybe some auxiliaries or something, and they get some state funding and some AUF. So it varies with each unit.
I have another question about salaries. So if you could talk a little bit about the last time there was like an across the board pay raise, and then also related to the actual number of the unrestricted gifts. I mean, you're saying it's small, but how small, and has that ever been given to salaries for staff?
Well, usually the unrestricted gifts are just that. They're a gift. They're a one-time gift. They're not really, and I can go back and get you some percentages. I don't have it with me right now. But so the problem with using a gift for salaries would be, is it going to be there next year? So that's part of the problem.
I'll take it one time though. I mean, that's fine.
Yeah, well, that's true. Yes. But I'll have to get you those numbers on the unrestricted portion of it. But the across the board was your other question. So yes, the state actually used to give some across the boards. I've been here long enough to where, and some of you might have been here when the state actually gave across the board increases. And they gave us state funding for that. That has not happened in many, many years. There was a time where they gave, we still have the ability to do that through our Board of Regents, but it's not something the state gives to universities anymore. And I don't even know, state agencies haven't had across the board in quite a while either. So it's really a decision at each institution, as well as, being approved by the Board of Regents. So across the board, it's been a few years, and I don't remember. No, when we did that's a good question. When we did across the boards from the state, that money only went to individuals paid from state funds. And so, again, the auxiliaries and the gifts and endowments don't receive that state money into their accounts. They can still follow the policy and give an across-the-board increase, but they have to pay for it within their own funds.
Recently, the president talked to the staff council officers about requesting additional funding for repairs and renovations across campus, since we're in a pretty dire need for some of those fixes over the years. Does that money come from AUF? Because
it can, yes. It kind of depends. It can come from AUF. It can come from a portion of our tuition funds. It can't come from state general revenue. Can't use that for repairs and renovations. But if it's an auxiliary that needs the repairs, then the auxiliary would pay for it. Yes.
The 57% for salaries, does that include student titles?
Yes, that whole salary and benefit on that. Yeah, I have another slide, but we had to shorten it a little bit because we had less time. But there is another I can send that kind of gives the breakdown of between staff, faculty, and TAs and AIs, and then hourly workers, which are mostly students.
One more.
I had seen something about this a while back, but can you speak at all about how our administrative costs compare to other universities that are similar in terms of percentage spent on wages and salaries?
I don't know if we have comparisons of administrative costs outside of the state of Texas. That is, clearly benchmarkable at this point. But within the state of Texas, we are the lowest except for Texas A&M, and I think one other institution may have gone above us for a little while. But it's right around, our administrative costs are right around 5.5%. I think the Texas average is more like 12 to 13%.
Yes. After the last legislative session, I believe the Board of Regents gave additional AUF funds, about 22 or 24 million, and much of that was earmarked towards faculty wages or money for faculty recruitment. And I was curious, is that a request that comes from the university to the Board of Regents? Does the system decide that? And would it ever be a possibility to use AUF funds in a similar manner, let's say a $24 million request to help staff funds?
Okay, so the Board of Regents can certainly choose to do things independently of the university, but certainly they're consulting with the president and the provost and the CFO on what our needs are. So I can't speak specifically to how that decision was made, but I would think it would have been a collaborative decision. There are, faculty recruitment and retention is a priority that the president speaks about frequently, and we're competing nationally for our faculty, so I think that's probably part of the message that's been shared. Certainly, there could be a request for staff if the president wanted to carry that forward. That's just.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mary. I really appreciate this, your time. I swear to you, I learn something new every time she comes and presents. And rumor on the street is that Mary will be retiring from UT after 36 years in May. So thanks.